Hi everyone, back with another review, and this time we will be looking at the Sparring Glove Infinity Glove, or more precisely we will be looking at the Sparring Glove Infinity Glove from a one-handed perspective. Now, to get the formalities out of the way first, as with all the reviews that we do, we will first have me talking about my impressions, giving the conclusion that we came to. Then we will have some pictures, just so that you can look at the glove in a bit more detail and from different perspectives. We will also give a number of pictures of the glove just holding at least some of the swords that I own, just so that puts it a bit more into context of, you know, how it fares with the various models that are out there. And then at the end we will give some sparring footage so that you can actually see the glove in motion and also can kind of see what we did to come to the conclusion that we in the end then came to. As always, we'll have the timestamps down in the description so that you can jump around and only look at the parts that you're really interested in. Okay. That being said, to quickly circle back to what I said at the very beginning of the video, looking at the Infinity Glove from a one-handed perspective. Why is that? That is just because when I looked for impressions, reviews of the Infinity Glove for our own purchasing decision, I just mostly found text videos that had a bit of a longsword focus. That's of course not bad, it's just that that wasn't what I was looking for, because that is not what we mostly do in our club. We do a bit of longsword, but that is mostly for fun. When it comes to actually working with the sources, what we do is Landsknecht, which is Leküchner and Glasgow, and we do Sabre and related weapons like the Spadroon, which is Hutton and Art of Defense. And what I just found that over the years with the gloves that I have owned is that one-handed disciplines present a bigger challenge to gloves. Simply because you can't really compensate for anything. To illustrate what I mean with that is, when I take my Maya as an example here, any problem that I have with maneuverability, be it with, you know, flexibility in the wrist or just dexterity with the fingers when moving the sword around, I can compensate for that, to a degree at least, using leverage, using my second hand. Of course, when I fence one-handed, it all has to come from that one hand, because I have no way of compensating for any deficit really. It will just show that much clearer in my fencing. Another thing is just simply bulk, the size of the glove. Looking at my Maya here, it has, compared to many other swords out there, a comparatively short hilt. And even with that, if I grip tightly, hands together, I still have enough room for both of my hands. If I move down a bit and grip the pommel, it's an even better situation. Plenty of room, basically. Many one-handed weapons don't really give you that kind of space. It's just, the grip is just, you know, shorter, of course. If you take the ridge as kind of an indicator of where a one-handed weapon might end, that already gives you an impression of the situation you might face. So that is why we thought it would be worth just adding to what is already out there, just with the perspective of people fencing mostly using only one hand. So reviews looked good. We decided to order. It's a simple process, of course. Sparring glove isn't new to the game, they're a household name. When you order the glove, you have the choice between a number of different cuffs This is the long version, Ulrich got the short one, and you can also get an hourglass cuff. This is just what I decided to do because it fit best with my elbow protection when I actually wear my gear. We ordered in June 2020 and got an estimate that the gloves would be ready in December 2020. When we asked again, around that time we were told that there would be delays and that the gloves would be ready in February 2021, and shipping included and everything, we got the gloves early March 2021. They cost about 190 euros for a pair. It depends a bit on your choice of cuff, but in that ballpark basically. And for 2 pairs we also had to add 30 euros for shipping, within Europe of course. Gloves are made in Poland, we're in Germany. And just as first impressions when we got them, putting them on, they are actually really quite comfortable for a 5-finger glove, I have to say. Articulation is good, really. The weight is quite fine. One of those comes in at about 500 grams, again, depends on the cuff that you have, but either way, not heavy at all. Actually felt really good in that regard. It's not fully articulated, of course. You have a first joint at the knuckles, then you have a second joint at the first joint of your fingers, and the rest is one piece, which I think is a nice compromise between articulation and protection, really. When it comes to the protection, first impression, also good. This is quite some thick, solid plastic here, I think at least 2 millimeters in most parts. That will not break any time soon. The inside glove is pretty generic, but nicely fitting. Wearing these, fencing with these, I didn't notice any hot spots at any point, really. The idea behind the protective value of the gloves is mostly that you have your finger fully encased, with the edges of the shell going quite a good bit down, so that when you grab something, what actually makes contact with your grip is the edge of the shell, at least when you actually get a hit, so that all the force is basically absorbed by the shell and your hand catches none of that. And we had some hits to the hand just when fencing longsword and spear and the stuff that we did, and I never really felt anything that was uncomfortable. I think if you catch a hit that really breaks one of those, you can just count yourself lucky that you had a good glove. So in that regard, that was really quite nice. One thing to notice though, is which you can probably already see, there is bulk to it. Just by necessity, really. If I add my hand just next to the glove, what my hands are basically doing wearing the glove is this. Which is by design, really, because of course you have a shell around each finger, which for protection is good, but also means that you can't close your hand as tightly as you would. Which, for two-handed things, be it longsword, spear, bayonet fencing or something, is mostly not a problem because you have room to compensate. When we get to one-handed weapons though, that is where we might actually then have a problem depending on what it is to do. To show what I mean, if we look at just the messer. A lot of messers have a longish hilt, not all of them, but a good amount, and with those you will be fine as far as just room goes. Sure, that leaves less room for your other hand if you actually want to do some wrestling or levering actions, but still, with this one from Landsknecht, for example, you still have enough room. You might only get 2 fingers around it, but that is enough for that extra leverage, so that is fine. What we noticed though, and that is again kind of by design, is that you have these 2 plates here, on the upper side and on the lower finger. And when you close your hand, they stick out a bit. They are not really flush. And what happened to us is that time and time again, just when moving around, because one of the reasons we got these gloves is that when fencing Longsmesser, you really need to be quite mobile with your hand. You need to change your grip for the different things that you do when binding and winding, is that sooner or later the nagel would slip between the plates, which isn't something that is uncomfortable, but when switching grip again, you notice, because the nagel is literally stuck there. You can kind of compensate for that if you grip the messer lower, but if you're used to getting close because maybe you want to do a thumb grip on the flat of the blade, not the flat of the grip, then this is just something that can happen. And that is just, again, that is kind of by design, because what that plate does is when you close your hand, you close that gap that you might have, or at least make it smaller. And what you might have already seen is another thing that we notice is that the idea, again, of the glove for protective value is that the plates make contact with the grip, so that any force that comes is absorbed by the shells and the grip, the blade. But that also means that when you want to do a thumb grip, there is a good chance, depending on how your thumb sits in the shell, because the glove is connected to the shell at the very end, that your thumb may not actually really touch what you want to get your thumb on. Less of a problem with the grip here, but here, for example, at the blade, I would really have to stretch, and that is a more cramped style of holding the sword than I would want to do. Plus, there is just no friction here. Very little feeling. In general, one thing that I personally noticed is that because I'm using lighter gloves for the most part, it feels a bit dull using these, because the plates make contact to what you're holding, not necessarily your glove in each instance. That is something that I could get used to though. This, with the plate, with the thumb grip, that is something that is a bit by design. Now in theory, of course, you could mod the gloves. You could see that you maybe take a bit off these plates or take a bit off here at the thumb, but that kind of compromises the protective value that you have, that you get from those. So I personally haven't come to a conclusion in that regard yet, really. That being said, I do see a value in having them. For example, what we recently did was we filmed a piece from the Glasgow Fechtbuch where we had a Versatzung mit gewappneter Hand, so parry with this hand position. And the idea is just that you get a very strong cut from above, you parry, block, and then wind your point into your opponent and thrust to face or breast. And that position always is a bit of a compromise between grabbing tightly so that you have enough room for the point, but also leaving enough room so that it isn't too dangerous when you actually parry the cut, which again is a strong cut. That is what the piece is explicitly made for. And I was just really glad having these for that and just minimizing the risk to my hand, because if you get a strong cut, you have a strong cut where your hand is caught between two fine edges of the blade, which isn't fun, really. We've done it, of course, before. I've done it using lighter gloves, nothing happened, but that was just basically for me feeling better about it. Especially because when we filmed, what we also did was pressure testing and deliberately trying to break the play. So things were a little bit more chaotic than during a usual fencing session or demonstration, really. So for that, they are good. I could see me using these gloves, for example, in a tournament situation. You don't exactly know who you're fencing. Generally, adrenaline is a bit higher, so that makes everything a bit less controlled, really, because you want to win and everything. And for that, I can really see these gloves doing good. Moving on to other hills though, it is a bit of a mixed bag, really, the experience that we had. So, taking one example, this is a custom Armour Class Spadroon. If you are familiar with the general dimensions of the Spadroon, you might already notice that this is really quite a large hilt for it. If I take my glove off, then you can see that there is plenty of extra space, which is much more than you would get in the historical examples that I know. Still, when I then take my glove, put it on again, it fits, but it fits barely. And again, what we notice is that if you move around a bit, you will catch the two side plates, really. And you will be able to see me in the sparring footage just sometimes having to correct my grip, because it's really quite annoying in that regard. Still, again, I could see me using the gloves with this sword. I have done so for testing, and it worked out in the end. But that is not something that I can unfortunately say for every type of hilt. Now, if we take a rather common example, this is just a standard Blackfencer nylon infantry saber. Again, a grip that is made larger to accommodate bigger gloves, but with those here, I can get my hand in, but I can immediately tell you it is not comfortable. Because, and that is again a bit by design, you have this curve here at the end of the grip, which usually is quite nice for hooking your little finger in, giving you just a tiny bit of extra speed, but you have these plates here at the end, and that just doesn't mix well, which just means that you really have to, mostly live with you not being able to close your hand as you would like to, which is a bit of a shame. To take another example, this is just an Armour Class hanger, and you can immediately see that is not going to work out in any way. There's just no way that that's going to fit in there. Admittedly, this is one of the more authentically sized hilts that I personally own, but still, basically just looking at it, that just won't work out really. Just no way you are going to get your hand in that. You will have less of a problem when you have a simple cruciform style hilt for your saber. If you take something like this Berberkusch Hungarian saber, then you will be fine for the most part, I would say. Again, it's not exactly a short grip. If I take my glove off, then you will probably immediately be able to see that I have a good amount of room left here. When I put my glove on, it will fit, but kind of barely, really. Still, if you fence with that kind of sword, you will probably be good. And you will appreciate the extra protection that you have. If you move to something else though, for example like this InMotu Berberkusch gymnasium style saber, the grip is pretty much identical to the V2 from Berberkusch as far as I'm aware. Again, no way that is going to fit in there. Admittedly, the argument can be made that when you have that kind of grip, you won't need that kind of protection. But still, it might look like it when you wear the glove, but this isn't exactly a short grip. This is made to give your hand plenty of room to be grabbed low and to extend your thumb along it. But with the glove on, you won't even be able to just hammer fist it or put it in a handshake, because it just won't fit through really. Another example for a more enclosed hilt is this Blackfencer Klewang prototype. Again, just no way you can grip that, because the shell just won't really allow for it. And one last example, this is just the standard Kvetun Sidesword, which has a reasonably sized grip. I actually quite like it for that. But trying to get your hand into that, you can make it fit, but as you can already see, you actually have to rotate the finger plate to make it work. Now, that will probably still work, but admittedly I'm not 100% comfortable with that. And it is a bit of a tight fit really. The plate of the finger snags at the ring here, and yeah, that isn't the best fit really. And that is basically a bit of a problem that I personally, for what I want to do, have with these gloves. As I said, I can see where the good reviews come from a longsword perspective. Fencing that was fine. Basically the same with spear, because again, you have the room to move around. Didn't get to try bayonet fencing, but that will be the same really, because you don't have your hands close together like that. And you have nothing that could impede the glove. But for the other things that I bought them for, which is, you know, later type of hills, more complex hills, they are just too bulky. These gloves are just too big. I can compensate for maneuverability. The wrists needed some breaking in, though it has gotten better. But I cannot compensate for it simply not fitting at all. That is of course not untypical in any way for other gloves. To compare it to other heavy gloves that I own or have owned, there is, for example, the classic sparring glove mitten. Never really felt comfortable with that one. It just didn't give me the flexibility that I felt I need in the fingers. And one odd thing with them is that the thumb was never in the place where my actual thumb was. I don't know, it didn't feel good. I never really used them that much. Then another example of a glove I tried is the nylon Montoya, and same problem basically. That thumb is just weird for me and didn't work out. Overall, a very bulky glove. That strap here in the grip I found to be incredibly uncomfortable. Didn't work out for me. One glove that I will use if I have to is the classic red dragon. That isn't exactly the same type of glove for me though. This is more like a medium to heavy-ish kind of glove. It offers way less protection than the Infinity Gauntlet, of course. It isn't quite as bulky, or at least it is more flexible, so you can squeeze it into more hills if you have to, but also this is just way cheaper. I think this is 70, 75-ish euros, depending on where you get them. Not really the same thing for me, I have to say. The heavy glove that I used most, probably, is the sparring glove 5-finger. And compared to those, I would say that the Infinity Glove is just a straight upgrade in pretty much every regard. Much better thumb. This again was a thumb that just didn't work out for me. It just felt weird and uncomfortable. Much better inside glove, because this is a proper glove and this is kind of a woven, I don't know what type of fabric that is, dipped in some kind of resin. And with those I have seen several examples online of the resin just cracking under a heavy hit and the finger underneath being injured. that is not something that I see happening with those. So in that regard, these are just way better, really, I find, and I won't be using those anymore. Particularly because, as you might have already noticed, I actually get to take these on and off quite easily, which is not something that I can say for those. Those are basically two gloves tucked into each other, and one of them being dipped in resin, and that just made it hard to actually get the glove on, particularly when you had been fencing and had to take them off for something. Not the case here, really, I have to say. Even when you had previously taken one glove off, just can slip into one. And one common problem I found with other ones, for example, gloves that I can't actually show you, the nylon armadillo, because I sent them straight back. When you had one glove on, getting the other glove on was really kind of a challenge, and you really felt like you actually needed a second to help you into them. Not the problem here. Those you can slip in and out quite easily. So, basically coming to a conclusion, I would say I can see me using those for two-handed stuff or one-handed stuff if the hilt will allow it. If you mostly do more complex hilted disciplines, you know, swords that have something like a knuckle bow or a fingering or both, or even more protection like a bowl, then I would say, if you can, check with someone you know who already has these gloves. See if you can maybe get a picture of how they will fit. Admittedly, I don't have the smallest hands, though they are not huge in any way, so if you have particularly small hands you might get away with more, but there is just a real risk that these gloves will just not fit, or if you can somehow squeeze them in, that they will really impact how you can move in the hilt, which will negatively impact the fencing that you can do. So, two-handed, definitely a fine glove in that regard, I would say. Especially since we're not particularly spoiled for choice. Anything one-handed, really better make sure to check beforehand. And before we move on to the pictures, one last thing that I didn't factor into the general review, because I think it might just be my glove. Ulrich hasn't had it happen to his, and I haven't heard from anyone out there in the wilds who encountered the same problem. You might have already spotted it. There is a plate between thumb and the plate for the back of the hand that covers this gap here. It is held by two of those screw rivets. On my left hand, oddly enough, one of those rivets came loose, which meant that the plate pivots down all the time, and you have that gap here. It's not a huge gap, but it shouldn't be there. It is not the rivet that is broken or anything. The rivet was screwed shut as tightly as it ever was. It is that the fabric around the rivet gave way. I don't know if it is just torn, if it is just a Monday piece, or if it is just worn out, loose. I don't know. Thing is, it's my left hand. I didn't use it as much. You can clearly see that on the glove, because when I fence one-handed, I mostly fence with my right hand. On my right hand, I could imagine it, you know, just snagging and being torn off, but not really on my left hand. Problem is, this is nothing that I myself can fix. I can alleviate the problem in a way, temporarily fix it by just unscrewing the rivet and screwing it back in, but it won't hold. I had fixed it before. Next time I used the glove, same problem again. As I said, it might just be my glove. I haven't heard from it happening to anybody else, but I've contacted Sparring Glove about it. I'll update the text on the review with just what came out of that conversation. Maybe something to keep in mind. And with that, I'll just leave you to pictures and sparring. Cheers!
Aber er hat mir schon in den Finger geschnitten.
Ja, aber das ist die Bruchstelle, ne?